Amvest Capital. Welcome to the Amvest Capital Inc. live webinar with Capella Minerals. Capella trades on the venture as CMIL and as NWDMF on the OTC. That's Nevada West Delta Mike Foxtrot. Hope you enjoy today's program. Will also be available in replay mode. A few housekeeping tidbits here as we use our new program. First of all, please ask a question of management. So you'll see highlighted here a place to send in a question. We'll ask it in real time. During the show, if you like this, you can share it. Link will work both for live and replay. Regular social media, email, you can share this show now. And then there's a few places as well you can get links and the PowerPoint and all that sort of thing, stock pages. And at the end of the show, please do share your feedback. Always very cool. Amvest, of course, is a New York-based specialist management and corporate finance firm focused solely on the natural resource sector. Actually should be a fourth box for research, but you'll all hear about that later. All important disclaimer, this call is most definitely for informational purposes only. Now to our program. Capella Minerals have with us today Eric Roth, President, CEO, and Director, PhD economic geologist with more than 25 years of experience, international minerals exploration and mining project evaluation. Many, many names to his name: Mariana, Awali, Aegean, Exeter, Kinross, Anglo Gold Ashanti, and of course Extorre Gold, which was a very, very successful deal, and that's the one I'm most familiar with working with Eric. So it's over to you, Eric. Take us through the show.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell, and thanks for the great introduction there, and a big welcome to all the listeners as well too. So Campbell, I guess since we last chatted a few months ago, the idea here is just to give everybody an update in terms of the latest movements that Capella has had over the last few months. There's been a lot going on. Of course, all of our projects now are in the Northern Hemisphere, so this has been the peak field season for us. So we have been moving all of the projects forward, and I'll just step people through in terms of what's been going on and how close we are to drilling, which of course are the main things that people are interested in hearing about. Just on the front, I guess the cover of the slide there, essentially what you're looking at, these are exposures of high-grade copper in Norway, and this is one of the areas that we have been working very, very hard this summer, really with the idea of finalizing that drill target generation work and getting those targets into drilling here in the upcoming winter. So some pretty exciting things in the portfolio, and I'll just step you through those just sort of one by one. But if I maybe step back and look at the big picture, so if we look at the portfolio, so the portfolio is similar to what we had a few months back, except that we have now strengthened the focus on Scandinavia. So we've added a new project in Finland, or actually two new projects in Finland, which are in the central Lapland Greenstone Belt. And of course, this is pristine real estate in the sense of there's some good discoveries being made in that belt, a lot of potential. We know there are world-class deposits in that neck of the wood, and we had an opportunity here to do a very soft deal on some really attractive real estate here. And I'll talk about that in a bit more in a moment. But if I just step back and look at the whole portfolio, so as we currently stand, we have, and if I just go from left to right on the slide, so we have two joint venture projects in Canada. We have the Domain Gold joint venture, which is with Yamana Gold. That's in Manitoba. That's roughly a 70-30 mix. Now, that's a project where there's an exploration agreement in place. We have about 10,000 meters of drilling so far. It is going back into permitting, and we do hope to be drilling that here again over this next winter. And this is a project that could very quickly get into resource status as well. But it is in the hands of our joint venture partner, Yamana Gold, and they are moving things forward in a fairly reasonably expedite manner there. The second joint venture, of course, in Canada is Savant Lake, and your listeners would probably be familiar that we did a deal on this about a year ago with Ethos Gold. So Ethos, to your listeners, you'd probably be familiar that they are part of the Discovery group of companies. They're very strong technically. They're very well known in Canadian markets particularly, and they've been very successful. They've got a number of sister companies, which include Newfound Gold, which is very busy in Newfoundland at the moment, and also, of course, Great Bear Resources. So fantastic joint venture partner to have there on board. We've now reached the 1-year anniversary of that deal. We've received a few more shares in Ethos, and those are shares that basically go into our back pocket, and they're further upside here for Capella shareholders. But of course, the main focus for us in terms of the projects that we are managing, that we're looking after on a day-to-day basis, are the Scandinavian projects. As we talked about in the last update, we do have 2 high-grade copper projects in Norway. One is which is called Kjoli. The other one is called Lokken. The fantastic thing about these projects is these are very high grade. These were 2+% copper deposits in their day. These are former mining districts. Norway, for those who aren't familiar, has a very long history of mining. They've had mining for hundreds of years, literally. So these are areas where people are familiar with mining. People had, grandfathers that worked in the mines. And the good thing is that these basically closed in the mid-80s for 2 reasons. One, because of low copper prices. Copper prices in the mid-80s got to about 60 cents a pound. And of course, today we're looking at north of $4 a pound. The second thing, of course, that happened in Norway was the discovery of oil. Because that generates so much profit for the country, people essentially just walked away from the mining. So these projects have been idle. These were mines that stopped producing. And so you've still got plenty of potential there to expand both the old mines, plus also add around, some of these satellite deposits around the old mines. So the attractiveness of the 2 Norwegian projects, of course, is that it's mixed brownfields, which means near mine type exploration, and also greenfields type exploration. So, and as you're probably aware too, one of the famous sayings, I guess, in our business, the best place to find a new mine is in the shadow of a head frame, and that's exactly what we have here on these Norwegian projects. If I just go across to into Sweden, so another project we have 100% of is called Southern Gold Line. So this is a brand new belt that's it's essentially parallel to the Boliden belt, which is probably more famous. That's the Boliden copper belt. But we have this new belt, Southern Gold Line, a number of multi-million-ounce discoveries already in that belt, including Barsele. You've got Svartliden, you've got Fäbodliden. So you've got a number of discoveries already made in that belt. And we are basically exploring a 500 square kilometer package that effectively surrounds the Svartliden and Fäbodliden mines. So really good, really interesting piece of the Earth's crust as well. Lots of potential, and virtually no systematic exploration has been done in this part of the world. And then, of course, the next projects, the 2 Finnish projects, which I alluded to in the introduction. So these are the new additions. We just announced this deal about a month ago. And we see this as a great opportunity to get into some quality real estate in Finland. And of course, as people know, Finland is one of the favorite jurisdictions for mining around the world. It's always sort of in that top 10 as far as the Fraser Institute surveys go. So, and of course, great geological potential. So, fantastic projects to pick up, and we look forward to moving those forward here over the winter. Just in terms of the capital structure, shares outstanding at the moment, about 151 million. We're trading about 10 cents Canadian, so it's a 15 million market cap. That's Canadian, of course. It's a fairly cheap entry price, I think, for the quality of portfolio that we have. Cash, we don't have a huge cash treasury at the moment. We're just a whisker under about 1 million Canadian. But we do have about $2.5 million of marketable securities, which are shareholdings in other companies that we've acquired through some of the deals over the last year. And these, of course, can be sold at any point and put back into the business, particularly when we're thinking about drilling some of these projects. Major shareholders, if we look at, we basically have 4 groups that control about half of the company. Our number 1 shareholder is Frucht Express. It's a group originally out of Austria. But they've been very, very supportive, and they've come in and really on the strength of the Norwegian copper projects, plus, of course, the portfolio in general. So they've been very, very solid, very good shareholders to have on board. As well, we have Sandstorm, which came from the original deal when the company used to have some projects in Argentina. We also have EMX royalty, and management is about 9.6%. So about 50% of the stock is held by four groups in particular. You sort of alluded to this, Campbell, in the introduction, but I think that one of the key messages here is that this is a group that's had a lot of discovery success over the years. Previously we were involved with Mariana Resources. Before then we had Extorre, and we've had a number of successes over the years. And I think, for your listeners, I mean, one thing that's obviously very important is to have a good suite of projects, to have quality projects in the portfolio, but you've also got to be sure that you have people who know what they're doing and know where you need to get to, which is really what I think we can add to this, to the equation here. So this is really the new addition since we last spoke, Campbell. So basically these are the two projects in Finland. As I mentioned, this is about 200 square kilometers of real estate, which surrounds, Outokumpu had an old mine there called Sapporo. So basically we have the ground around that. We're also right next door to well, I'll say quite an expensive joint venture that Kinross Gold did with S2 Resources, basically looking at the same geology. But, the difference that we have is we got a very simple deal, very easy deal to get into this real estate. And, as I did mention, it is a belt with a lot of movement. You've got Rupert Resources along strike with Ikari. You've also got Orion Resources. And of course, Agnico Eagle has the Capella Gold Mine here, which is the biggest gold mine in Europe at the moment. So this is an area where there's lots going on and lots of great potential. And we look forward to pushing this forward as we go forward here. In terms of this summer's field work, and again, just thinking about the big picture, so obviously we recognize the key thing is to get projects into drilling. So the two Canadian projects are moving forward, and we do expect to be drilling those through our joint venture partners as we go forward over the winter. But in terms of the projects that we have been managing and looking after ourselves, so Kjoli, the two high-grade copper projects in Norway have taken up most of the focus in the sense of we now basically have virtually completed the target generation work at Kjoli, and that constituted a number of different parameters to get to where we are today. Then we will go into permitting and then basically be looking to drilling. Hopefully that permitting process should take about 2 months, and then we'd be ready to start drilling here. And the real attractive thing with Kjoli, of course, is that this was also a former mining district. You can actually still stand on outcrops that are running 2% on the surface. We have a 20-kilometer long belt of prospective stratigraphy, and with lots of occurrences along that belt. So, and our target here, we basically have about 26 targets all up to look at here. But of course, what we will do is we're just in this process of prioritizing those so that we can actually, during this winter, we can get in, drill the priority targets, and really push those forward on the path to resource definition. So, so most of the summer work has been focused here. The other thing too is this one's a slightly higher altitude project, so this will get the snows first, which is why the focus has been here. And of course, now as we go forward, we can also focus on some of the other projects, well, such as Lokken. But again, I think one of the key aspects here, these are high-grade, massive sulfide deposits. These are very high-value deposits in terms of in-situ dollar per ton deposits, and that's really the attractiveness thing. And to think that, there were two mining operations here within our project area. So you've got Kjoli, you've got Skillingdal. The old Kjoli mine was running about 2.9% copper in its day, and we've still got lots of potential here along strike to add new resources to the equation here. So the second project in Norway is called Lokken. So this was an old mining district as well. And I should probably mention too that in the case of Lokken, Lokken was actually the largest Cyprus-type massive sulfide deposit discovered anywhere. It ended up mining about 24 million tons at just over 2.3% copper, 1.9% zinc with gold and silver credits too. So it was a big deposit. It basically daylight's on the eastern side, and it's 4 kilometers in length, and it's about 1 kilometer deep on the western margin. So we have potential to still extend that. But one of the key things to think about here too is that we have a very large land holding around the old mines, and there's a number of targets here that are really being looked at in terms of getting them into drilling and bringing them into, really into that discovery phase as quickly as we can. Keep in mind too that these massive sulfide deposits always occur in clusters. Lokken itself was a big deposit. It was, as I mentioned, the biggest of its class ever. And just the way the geology in these systems works, you will always find satellite deposits to that, which also have some, good grade in them as well too. So the focus has really been, we've got 6 priority targets here. But having said that, in terms of known copper occurrences, there's probably about 20 or so in this district that need a closer look at. One of the things that we also highlight to people too is that when you look at the discovery outcrop for Lokken, one of the things that really is amazing, it's so unspectacular. It's just this little massive sulfide that's not even half a meter thick, and it really is quite remarkable to think that below that it opens up into this 24, 25 million ton deposit. And I think one of the things that is a real eye-opener here in this belt is that you can see that sort of scenario where a relatively small occurrence on surface could signify something, quite significant at depth. So the focus for Lokken here is to complete that target generation focus 2. As I mentioned, Kjoli, we're just about there. We have very little more to do before we go into permitting. Lokken will follow fairly shortly afterwards, and then we move into the permitting for Lokken as well. So if I just jump across the border now into Sweden, and essentially, as I mentioned, we are talking about a 500 square kilometre belt here. We are talking about a belt where there's known multi-million ounce deposits. We are in the southern part where you have Svartliden, Fäbodliden very close. And really what we're doing here, this summer was effectively all about trying to be systematic. We know we've got gold-bearing boulders sitting on surface. And now the trick in these till-covered terrains, as you're probably aware, northern Scandinavia, particularly Sweden, Finland, you always get this very thin till cover. And so a lot of the exploration is really driven by this systematic sweeping through the properties with auger drilling. And that's really what the focus has been this summer, as we continue to sweep and look for the source of these gold-bearing boulders that we see on surface. But because the geology is covered by this thin till cover, we need to do that systematic work to see where the source of those boulders was. So the summer work program at Southern Gold Line has been that systematic process. It's a project that I think we'll get around to drilling next year. I don't think it's a project that we'll get around to drilling this winter. And just a couple of quick comments on the two Canadian projects. So we have Savant Lake, which, as I mentioned, so these are iron formation hosted type deposits. This is the joint venture that we've signed with Ethos Gold. So Ethos is working in this at the moment. And they have already pushed the project forward in the sense that they've done some airborne geophysics. They've done some work on the ground. And the plan is obviously now to continue that process, push the project forward, and go into permitting for some drilling here over the winter as well too. So, and the deposit type we're looking here is an equivalent to the Musselwhite mine, which is the Newmont mine there. So, and the nice thing about these is they're high-grade deposits, very simple metallurgy, and these iron formations just generally are very conducive to having nice gold mineralization in them. So we look forward to Ethos pushing this project forward over the next months as well. And the second joint venture, of course, as I mentioned, is Domain. This is where we have almost 10,000 meters of drilling. This is in northwestern Manitoba. And essentially what we're looking at here, again, we've only drilled a very small portion of this. There's about an 800-meter long section of what we call the main zone. We have another 5 kilometers of cumulative strike extent to still test. Some very good grades from the drilling so far, and we are looking forward to getting to the next stage of drilling here. So, so this is, they're all good projects in their own right, and I think each of them has a fantastic chance of being very successful. So we're looking forward also to seeing this project get pushed through. So just to sort of wrap up in terms of the value drivers, so just the big picture. So our focus is on high-grade, high-quality gold and copper projects. I think it's a nice mix of projects for a company of our size. We are focusing on mining-friendly jurisdictions, of course, Canada, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. So these are all areas that have proven you can move projects forward. And I might just make a quick comment on Norway too, because that's probably the one we get the most questions on in terms of the permitting process. I should mention that there is a mine that's just been permitted. So keeping in mind a lot of these projects sort of really shut down. They went dormant in the mid-'80s. The last few years, you've seen a lot more projects coming back online. You're seeing now exploration permits, drilling permits being issued, and there is a new mine up in northern Norway called Nussir, which now has its full construction permits. So the permitting process is working well in Norway as well too. So that's just one comment I'd make, because that's one of probably the most common questions we get out of that group of 4 countries. How is permitting in Norway? So far everything is working as it should. You know, for me personally, I do like these high-grade massive sulfide deposits in Norway. They have the potential to be company makers. Of course, they fit well into the general strategy of Europe needing more of these green metals. You need, you know, everybody wants electric cars. Everybody wants the power transmission from suitable sources. So we do really see a good opportunity here to get these projects forward. There's great potential there. Fantastic infrastructure still around in these areas, and that's another comment I should make too. So you've got good geology, you've got fantastic infrastructure, and you've got, you know, a solid jurisdiction in which to work. So these are fantastic projects, and we do look forward to moving those forward. The basic target that we're looking for in each of those copper projects, you know, at these kind of grades, when you're talking about 2+% copper, you know, 10+ million tons in each is really the target that we're looking for, because that would be more than enough to start thinking about building mines. So as I mentioned, we have been working on the 4 projects that will go into drilling over the winter, that we expect to go into drilling. You've got Savant Lake and Domain in Canada. We've got the 2 high-grade copper projects in Norway, so that's Lokken and Kjøli. And of course, in parallel, we've been doing the work on the Southern Gold Line in Sweden. And that is really with the goal of having some discovery drilling underway for next year, but that's not something that we will do in the short term. And I haven't mentioned they're the finished projects. We're still in the position now of just pulling all the data together for those and looking at getting some auger drilling also getting done here over the winter. We do also have a residual interest in another project, which is Sierra Blanca, and that's in Argentina. And just to make a comment there, that our JV partner, the people that are earning into that project, which is Extorre Gold, have now delivered on the first year of spend, and so they are well on the path to earning into that their interest in that project. And of course, our number one business is discovery. So our role, if you like, is discovery, getting projects through resource status, and then of course taking them through those early mining studies. But in our back pocket too, we should always keep in mind that we have these shareholdings, these corporate shareholdings in Cerro Gold and also Ethos Gold, and those are really just extra upside here for Capella shareholders. So that's kind of the big picture sort of roundup in terms of what's new since we last chatted. And I guess I think the key message to take away here is a great mix of gold and copper projects. High grade is the focus, as has always been the focus. It always is a project focus. And then the second thing, of course, too, is that these are great jurisdictions to be operating in. But that's sort of where we are at the moment, Campbell. So I just thought that's just a quick overview, and obviously happy to take any questions if there's any questions out there.
Great, thank you very much. Sort of start with the COVID question. How has that affected things and your timeline?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, Campbell, and it really did affect us in Norway quite a lot. So Norway has, it had very, very strict COVID restrictions for getting in. So the most difficult thing for me, for example, I could only get in sort of at the very end of July. So we really missed sort of half the field season in terms of, us getting in. Anybody from outside had a very difficult time getting into Norway this year, just because the restrictions were so tight. So unfortunately, we did lose a bit of time in the beginning of the season, but I think we've made up for that with, we've done a lot of work in the last few months, and I think we're sort of pretty well back on track in terms of now being able to go back into permitting. So, but for the other countries, it wasn't so much. Well, Canada, of course, I haven't been able to get across to either. Although Canada is opening up, and Sweden's been the most relaxed of all of them. But Norway for us was the toughest in terms of the COVID travel restrictions for sure.
Thank you. What are the costs of next phase of exploration for the projects that you'll be advancing on your own?
Yeah, so the projects that we have to fund ourselves, Campbell, so we just, as a yardstick, for example, in Norway and Sweden, we just assume about $1 million for every 5,000 meters of drilling that's done. So really what we're thinking about is at least getting the drilling underway. We can start to push the projects forward. As I mentioned, the 2 copper projects will be priority. And so really the plan for us is to start, getting those drill holes into the ground. The drilling obviously has 2 things. One is obviously to prove the concept, to show that we have these high-grade lenses, these deposits that can be extended. But the other thing too is that once we get some drill holes into the ground, that will also allow us to do some downhole geophysics such as EM, which will then allow us to get a much better 3D picture of what's going on underneath as well too. So, so the plan initially is obviously to get started with the drilling as far as we go. Obviously with the treasury we currently have, we won't get too far, but keeping in mind we do have those $2 million of the marketable securities that we can sell at any point. And then obviously once we've proven the concept, once we show that we can deliver on discovery and I guess the size potential, then you know, hopefully the share price is at a much better position to where we are.
Are there any residual NSRs or royalties on any of these assets?
Yeah, so the three projects that we picked up, Campbell, from EMX, which are the two Norwegian projects and the Swedish project, yes, we actually acquired those from EMX Royalty. Your listeners probably know them from, they're the Denver-based group, so they've got a great business model where they're essentially, you know, generating their future royalty stream. They come with 2% royalties, or effectively a 2.5% royalty, of which we can acquire 0.5%. So they do come with a 2% royalty, but I think the good thing, again, as I say, because we're focusing on high-grade projects, they can wear royalties much better than low-grade projects can. So, so we're not particularly worried about the impact of the royalties.
Okay, I'll pass this over to Adam. Adam?
Thank you, Campbell. Thank you, Eric. Just thinking about the high-grade copper targets, was that historically, were these deposits concentrated, or were they direct shipping ore?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Adam. So, so in the Røros district, which was actually, so in the case of Løkken, they've always produced essentially a concentrate. So what they produced was a concentrate that went out. They had a railway, and the railway is actually still there. So the concentrates were taken down to a deep water port, which is about 25 kilometers away, and then sent off to smelters. In the case of the Røros deposits, in which Kjoli sort of sits, there used to be many years ago, until the 1950s, they actually used to smelt the ore themselves there. It all came into a central processing facility. They smelted and they actually produced copper. But then from the mid-1950s onwards, that they went to a concentrate as well too. So, so Løkken has always been basically a concentrate type scenario, whereas Kjoli was essentially for many years it was they actually did their own smelting. But then, as I say, in the 1950s, they flipped back to just a conventional concentrate. And that would be our preferred path going forward too. Obviously, we know flotation works very well in these systems. You know, these are just copper zinc with silver and gold, and you know, they should give very good quality concentrate, certainly on the basis of what we know has been processed to date.
And how well historically did the copper separate from the zinc, and where did the gold and silver go?
Yeah, you know, well, I'll start with the precious metals, Adam. So with the gold and zinc, with the gold and silver, we actually don't have a lot of information on that. You know, what actually happened in the times these mines were in production, they never actually did gold and silver assays. So we actually don't know where that. I actually don't know where that went, to be honest. You know, and if you go through all the old mine plans, in fact, you know, Lokken, for example, when they opened the mine, they didn't even take zinc credits into account. All they looked at were the copper numbers. So, so the gold and silver, I couldn't tell you where they went. I could probably guess, but I don't know for sure. And in the case of zinc, there are some of these massive sulfides are much more zinc rich, so it would probably make sense, you know, thinking in the future, you would probably end up with a situation where a copper-rich deposit would end up with more a copper-type concentrate. But some of these more zinc-rich parts of the system may well be zinc concentrates. And I should mention too, in terms of processing the concentrates, you have options both in southern Norway and, of course, across the border in Sweden, in Skellefteå. That's the Boliden smelter as well too. So you actually have within Scandinavia, and of course Finland as well too, has places to smelt as well. So
yeah, plenty of smelter capacity. My thought is, yeah, my thought is, you know, if you look at the old mines, that you're likely going to be either finding extensions to or finding satellites to. Likely you're going to have to make 2 concentrates at the even if zinc is a minor element, you still have to suck it out, so you're not getting penalized for it on the copper side.
Correct. Yep.
And
certainly at Lokken, and certainly at Lokken in the old day before it closed down, that's what came out. There were 2 different concentrates. There was a copper and a zinc concentrate. But of course, I know there's a lot of interest in zinc as well still these days. But certainly, our focus is really looking at the copper-rich parts of the system.
Certainly, that makes certainly, and within these historic ore bodies where they're within an individual ore body where they're copper-rich portions and zinc-rich portions, or the individual ore body is usually fairly homogeneous.
Yeah, the individual ore bodies, Adam, tend to be fairly homogeneous. What we generally see, for example, around Lokken is they tend to be more copper-rich in general. It's also very different geology. So the one thing I should mention too in Lokken, it's actually, without getting too technical, it's actually an ophiolite sequence that hosts these. They tend to be very copper-rich deposits. So this is all, of course, it's just ocean crust that's been thrust up and now it's sitting up on top. It's now sitting on surface. Whereas around the Kjoli district, you do tend to find a lot more deposits in zinc-rich. You get some which are copper-rich, like the old Kjoli mine, but you do get a lot of zinc-rich deposits as well too. So. So, I mean, what's the rough timing of the drilling as you see it? Because I'm very excited to, I want to almost say I'm not as excited about the drilling as I am about the geophysics that you can run after you do the drilling. Yeah, correct. And so if I look at the drilling, and probably there'll be a few questions just in terms of timing. So Kjoli, as I mentioned, so if I start with Norway, the 2 Norwegian copper projects, so Kjoli, probably this next week we should be finalising the drill target generation work. We're pulling in the last. We've also done a ground gravity survey, which we're just getting that data for. And of course, the other thing that we're going to build in the last of the data that we've gathered in this summer field season, define the drill holes and effectively get those into permitting. So that process should take about 2 months. So by the end of November, hopefully we have the permits in hand and ready to kick off drilling. One thing I will mention too is that we have a couple of options on the drill side. One is a conventional drill. Another one is there's a new man-portable rig in the country at the moment. So that makes the permitting process a lot easier, because one of the main issues in Norway is actually the driving across people's fields. Of course, having said that, winter is actually the best time to be drilling, as it would be in Canada, because the ground is nice and hard. So winter is actually the best time to be drilling these projects in any case. And then, of course, Lokken, as I mentioned, we still have a little bit more to go in the target generation work, but that will follow fairly close in the permitting process as well too. So we are looking at, Kjoli should be the first cab off the rank, hopefully permits in hand in November, and then Lokken should be shortly afterwards that. And then, of course, in parallel, we have the 2 Canadian gold projects in the hand of joint ventures, which will be running forward in parallel as well.
Can you just talk, you mentioned it during your presentation, but can you just review again your cash position and then your options, potential liquidity up and above that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the cash at the moment, we're just a whisker under 1 million Canadian, Adam. So it's not a huge treasury, and we're aware of that. It's enough for the short-term work that we need to do, but obviously that's not going to fund a big drill program as we go forward. So we really have 3 things to look at here. I mean, the first thing is, of course, we do have quite a few warrants that are fairly close to being in the money. So the hope is also to, if people are able to exercise those warrants, or if there's interest in exercising those warrants, that could potentially put about 7 million Canadian into treasury. So we've got basically the money in treasury. We've got the warrants, which are very close to being in the money. We also have these marketable securities now, which are worth about 2.5 million at the moment Canadian. And of course, the hope is obviously that they do much better, and if we can cash those in at a better price, then that's great too. So, and of course, the third option is to go back to market for a raise. But I guess at these sort of levels, I'm not that enthusiastic. That wouldn't be my first prize if we can avoid it, simply because, look, we're all shareholders, and I'd rather not have to do a big raise at 11 cents. So, so obviously from our perspective, you know, if we can prove the concept, get some drill holes into the ground, you know, really just get the interest going, just really prove the concept and show that we're on the right track. And then on the back of that, we can, you know, then things should snowball from there.
I mean, you know, clearly you have assets, you know, across, you know, copper and gold, and you know, maybe, you know, I would hope that some of the early drill holes you're going to be shooting for some of these high-grade copper targets to show the market that the grade is there and the intervals are there, and then they can associate you with copper, and understand, and from that, you know, really understand the potential. You know, so I'd like to see that sequence of events before you guys go back to the market. In my opinion.
Yeah, and that would be first prize for all of us, Adam, because as I mentioned, look, we're all shareholders ourselves too. You know, we've been, you know, solid supporters of our own companies. So, you know, so obviously, but, you know, we've got other options before we need to go back to the market. So, you know, so we would obviously try and push those other options before we had to go back to the market. So, you know, we're not that enthusiastic to go back at these levels, obviously. So, yeah,
but you know, the idea of you know, of identifying, you know, these 10 million ton, you know, 2% copper targets, I think, is a fairly unique proposition. I can't think off the top of my head of too many other guys that are doing it, because most everybody else is trying to find, you know, kind of a 0.5% copper porphyry, you know, in Ecuador or in Argentina, you know, so. You know, I think, you know, some positive drill results, you know, could really, you know, bring the market attention. Maybe you could also, you've talked a bit about it, but maybe you could also just go through, in regards to the drilling and further development, again, you know, focusing on Norway, in regards to, you know, permitting cost and anything you guys are doing from a social perspective to engender goodwill, so that, you know, if you find something, you know, if you're able to really identify something really nice here, you're not going to then, you know, you're not going to then see a roadblock from a social standpoint.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, and just on the social side of things, obviously that's you know, wherever we do operate and wherever we have operated, that's always been a high priority. As we know, I mean, social license is everything. If you don't have the social license, you don't have a project. So, you know, so from our perspective, that's always been you know, communications first and foremost, and so we make a big effort. It's been a little bit tougher in the COVID type times because it's difficult to get people together, I guess, but you know, we have done as well as I think we could have done, given the COVID restrictions in terms of, you know, getting people together and meetings and things. But certainly communication is key. And as I mentioned early on in the talk, one of the key things here is that these are old mining districts. People are familiar with mining, so it's not you know, this isn't an abstract concept that we're talking about. You know, so that does help us a lot. And the fact that if you go to these projects today, there's still a lot of the old infrastructures there. You know, I mean, at Lokken, you've still got you've still got operating mine shafts. I mean, functioning, not operating, but as in functioning. You've still got the flotation plant there. I mean, you've got a lot of this stuff is still sitting there. So people see that every day, and they remember that mining was an important part of the economy here. And so, you know, so I think we'll get, you know, but obviously communication from our side is number one. It is and always has been. But I think what does help basically is that you know, these are former mining districts, and that makes a big difference too, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just a couple of other comments too, just on Norway that I might throw in as well too. I mean, you know, as well as having fantastic infrastructure, some of the mine infrastructure too that I mentioned, you know, it also has some of the lowest energy costs on the planet, and of course that's you know, it's all hydroelectric power. It's you know, and that makes a big difference too when you're building these projects. The fact that you have good infrastructure, so it means that you don't need to spend as much as you would if you're in the, I don't know, let's say the back end of Africa or something. I mean, you've got great infrastructure there. You know, you've got the very proficient people. You've got, you know, very technically skilled people. And of course, you've got great, great energy options. And if you look at what's happening around the world, energy costs are going through the roof. So that makes a big difference too. So there's a lot of advantages. So while people sort of, mentally think that Norway is an expensive country to operate in, actually, when you look at the whole package, it's actually not that expensive a place to be. And considering you've got all this infrastructure in place, you've got good people available, and you've got all of these other benefits like, probably the cheapest, certainly in first world terms, you've probably got the cheapest energy on the planet. So, so a lot of pluses to being in Norway for sure.
So the high cost portions are would those be the the labor costs and the holding costs? Would those be the key high cost in comparison to other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, labor costs are a little bit more than other places, but I mean, as you know, Adam, look, I worked many years in Chile and in South America too, and but I mean, and where labor costs tend to be cheaper, but you've got a hell of a lot more people in the projects, right? So I mean, the way I sort of look at it is that these things balance out, because yes, I mean, wages might be higher, but you actually need a lot less people to run these projects than you do in some of these other countries, right? So that we consider, first-class jurisdictions. And so at the end of the day, I don't view the labor costs as a big issue, because yes, while the salaries might be higher, you actually tend to have less people, working in the mines than you would, as I say, in Chile. I mean, if you look at the, pounds of copper produced per worker, I mean, the numbers aren't that great in places like Chile, just because you've got so many people on the mine sites as well, right? So,
yeah, you think Chile is bad, you should say, DRC.
Yeah, and I just throw that as an example, but I just because I mean, the first question I get is, isn't Norway an expensive country? And then when you put it in the context of, the pros and cons of everything, it's actually still a pretty competitive place to be. And you've got a very good tax rate. So you've got 22% corporate tax rate. So there's a lot of pluses for being in Norway for sure. So
is a 22% corporate tax rate? Is there an additional mining tax or government royalty on top of that?
There's no royalties at all. There's no government royalty at all, Adam. So what the Norwegian law states is that there's a 0.5% royalty due to the landowner. Now, if that happens to be the government, then so be it. Then the government gets that. But if it's a private landowner, the idea is to basically compensate the private landowner for any perceived losses. So the only royalty that's due is a 0.5% royalty to whoever the landowner is, but there are no government royalties at all. So that that's another plus. I mean, again, if I use Chile as the example, they're talking about really jacking up the royalties, which makes a big difference. When
if you haven't heard, they're talking about that now in the United States. So.
Sure, yeah, and that's a big problem. But Norway has zero government royalties, right? So that makes a big difference as well. So.
Eric, question for you. You're looking at you're looking at historic districts here. If you find a material extension to an existing known ore body that's access to an existing mine, what are you thinking about that? Is it worth trying to rehab a mine, to access new ore versus new access?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I mean, in the case of Løkken, Adam, my suggestion is that we should be really focusing on the near-surface satellite deposits, because, as I mentioned, Løkken, the deepest part where they stopped mining was about 1 kilometer down, and I guess initially, there's going to be a lot of work in terms of dewatering and getting, even getting access down there, and we certainly don't want to be drilling kilometer-deep holes from surface right off the bat. So initially, for example, at Løkken, our focus will be on the satellite deposits that are at surface. We know there's mineralization at surface, and then as a longer-term project, we'll look at obviously expanding, those, having a look around the old mining operations as well too. But that's going to be a longer-term process in terms of there's obviously dewatering. Nobody's been in those. I mean, most of the mine except for the near-surface stuff. So. So it's just one of the, I think we, just as a general thing, we would probably focus on near-surface high-grade mineralization as a priority initially, anyway.
So related to that, Eric, how deep can the EM penetrate that you're going to apply?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and there's other factors too. I'd say the EM. So in terms of the EM data that we have, we currently have regional surveys, Adam, for both the projects. Now, one of the problems at Løkken, of course, is that it's cross-cut by high-voltage power lines, which sort of mess up a lot of the signals. So So, where we have been able to salvage the data, we have, and we are using that as part of the targeting process as well. And in the case of Kjoli, the idea is to, there you don't have that same issue. So the EM data is fantastic. We've got really good coverage. But of course, as I mentioned, once you get into drilling, that gives you a bit, the opportunity to actually do a bit more sort of closer work around some of those drill holes and really start mapping things in 3D. And that really helps to guide the drill holes as you drill one, you do the downhole EM, and that should generate other targets around it, and that helps you just guide that drilling process as well. So.
And the stuff that's outcropping on the surface, these satellite ore bodies that are outcropping at the surface, will you be able to well define, the extent of those ore bodies to get an idea of the overall volume, without doing very much drilling, really using the EM?
Yeah, so one of the dangers with the EM, Adam, is that in these belts there's also massive sulfides that don't have copper or zinc in them, right? So one of the things we need to be very, very careful with the EM data is it can also generate some red herrings, right? So one of the reasons that this work has been so systematic, and I'll say it's we've been very thorough in the sense of, you don't want to get carried away and just drill EM anomalies because they could be duds if you're not in the right geology. So it's really, really important, that process of integrating the geology with the EM, and where everything sort of ticks the right boxes, they're the ones you want to drill, because it is quite easy to get distracted by a geophysical anomaly, which is a complete bust, right? And that's obviously not what we're looking for. So, obviously in the projects, we've got lots of anomalies, but what we have to do is focus on the ones that jibe with the geology where we would expect to find mineralized these copper-rich massive sulfides.
Is there always a sequence, a pattern where you have massive pyrite, that comes under the massive chalcopyrite or bornite? Is that how it generally works, or is there any kind of a pattern like that?
Yeah, so generally what we do see, they have these, the ore bodies themselves are typically just chalcopyrite, they're pyrite and pyrrhotite. So that's, if you look at the massive sulfide, the mineral, and of course sphalerite as well too. But what happens is, as you go distally from these, you tend to get these pyrite rich, they call them these vascous layers, which are just sort of on the flanks of so imagine the main part of the system is sitting here, and if you just happen to drill on the margins of it, you could get some of that unmineralized stuff. So you've got to be very careful to make sure you're drilling in the right part of the sequence.
Right. So, but if you hit pyrite, then you should be able to vector it.
Correct.
You're on the
Correct.
margins.
You know you're on the margins, then you've got to be going either this way or that way, depending on what the geology.
So there should be no wasted drilling if you're drilling, these EM anomalies, because at the very least you should be able to use it to vector if you hit pyrite.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's for sure. So absolutely.
All right. This is let me pass it on to Erdi. Maybe he's got a couple of questions because I don't want to dominate the entire call here.
Thank you. Hi, Eric. When we look at the past producing Nordic projects, and maybe it's early, but if you can comment on the characterization of the tailings, how hard it will be to get a permit.
Yeah, and it's a good question, Erdi, and it's obviously a big discussion point in Norway in terms of just permitting for mining projects in general, especially those that are close to the coast. Now, in the case of the old Løkken mine, there was a lake close to the mine that was used as the tailings dump, and it was, and basically it's an enclosed basin, if you like. So it's not it's not an issue from an environmental standpoint in terms of being in a closed basin. Having said that, my personal view with tailings is that we shouldn't be looking at tailings ponds. If the project allows for it, we should be looking at effectively pushing the tailings back underground with mix them with concrete, put them back underground, and fill up the old stopes with it. So if the mine plans allow that, and depending on the geometry of the bodies, my view is that we should be, if we can, avoiding tailings dams altogether, in the sense that we should just be basically taking the water out of the tailings, mix them with concrete, and push them back underground. I mean, that would be first prize for me, and that avoids the whole issue of having tailings on surface, which I don't think anybody really, I mean, hopefully we don't need to take that route. Of course, the other opportunity you do have is you can actually press the water out of the tailings and use them on waste dumps as well if you had to, and that helps with the rehabilitation process. So there's a number of options we can look at. I think first prize for us would be to try and avoid the tailings dams if we could. But of course, we need to look at what the project tells us in terms of what works. But I think if we can, we'll certainly look at trying to avoid tailings dams. They're just the sort of thing that you can see them a long way off, and they're not the sort of thing you really want. Just the optics of it don't look that great if you can avoid it. So.
Yeah. And is there a specific reason that the Lokken mine stopped producing?
Yeah, just because of the cost. So what happened early? Two things happened in the mid 1980s. So copper dropped to 60 cents a pound. Keeping in mind too, at that point they were mining a kilometre underground. So and in fact, the Astrip shaft, which is the westernmost shaft, it reaches about a kilometre down. And essentially, they just weren't making much money. I mean, at 60 cents a pound, these things just really weren't generating much cash flow. It wasn't covering much in terms of the capital costs to get down there. And then, the grades were still fantastic, but, at 60 cents a pound, you weren't making much money out of these things. And then the second thing, of course, that happened was, with oil, which just generates so much money and, relatively in a much simpler fashion, that people just walked away from mining essentially. But of course, times have changed. I mean, basically now you've got much better metals prices all round. So keeping in mind, we've got now copper, zinc, gold, and silver, all of which are at much better levels than they were in the mid 1980s when the mines closed down. So I think you're in a much better position to push these forward now. And as I mentioned during the talk too, our focus always is on high grade. Doesn't matter whether we're looking at gold or copper. Because those kind of mines can generally weather the cycles much better than the lower grade deposits.
Thank you, Eric. I will pass it to Campbell.
Great. Thanks, Artie. I have a few questions from the audience, and then we'll close. It's been a great session here. Any amount of money that might be required from your JV with Yamana? And payments.
Yeah, so the current drill, so Campbell, so the answer to that question is, so the next round of drilling that Yamana is planning, they're not planning on a big program, just, the last time we had a JV meeting, which was a little while back, but, our share of that next spend would probably be only 400, let's say 450K Canadian, so we're not talking about a big contribution. It's not like it's going to be a $10 million program. So now, and of course, in the case of Domain, we have two options. We have the option of participating and not losing out, not diluting out, or we do have the option of diluting out if we want. Now, personally, I don't think diluting out is a great business strategy, but it is an option that we do have should we decide not to contribute to the program. So, but the program that Yamana had on the table, the last iteration we looked at, which was quite a while ago now, probably a good 6 months ago now. But our share would have been about that 450K Canadian. So we're not talking about we've got to put in $10 million or anything.
Cash on hand, burn rate, and when do you think you'll need to raise again? And how would someone participate if he or she wanted to?
So just following on from the conversation there with Adam, so we have less than $1 million Canadian in treasury, which I know isn't a great, it's not a huge treasury. But it is enough short term for what we need to do. But of course, it won't cover a big drill program. Now short term, our preference would be to try and either sell those marketable securities, which are sort of about $2.5 million Canadian worth at the moment, or we can get some of these warrants into the money, which would bring, if all of them were exercised, $7 million into treasury. And then, of course, the third option would be a raise. But to be honest, as I mentioned in the discussion with Adam, first prize would be, let's look at those other options first, because I, as a fellow shareholder, don't want to get diluted out either. So let's try and do the next raise at the best level we possibly can. So.
Yep. Can you be more specific about the team working in Norway and the steps that are currently being taken on the exploration side? You answered a lot of that, but anyway, anything more to add on Norway and your groups there? Yeah,
just in terms of the Norwegian team, so obviously the focus is on hiring local. We've got a very experienced senior geologist by the name of Rooney Wilberg. He's helping us. He's been around forever. So he's helping us with the advancement of these projects. We've got a few young guys as well helping us, guys that have come out of school, out of university, and itching to get into mineral exploration. So we've got a pretty enthusiastic team on the ground. And in terms of people too, we also have available to us some of the EMX team. So the way we've traditionally operated is that EMX also has people they can second to us. And so, depending on workloads and where we need people, we can also, take people out of EMX on a timesheet type basis as well too. So I think we've got it's early days in terms of building a good team, but I think we've got some great people on board, and they'll be able to help us push these projects forward at a good rate of knots. So,
timeline on news announcements, drilling results, etc.
Yeah, so the drilling, I think over the next couple of months, what we'll see basically, Campbell, is in terms of, it'll be the wrapping up of the target generation work on the 2 Norwegian projects. It'll be the permitting process. And as I mentioned, drilling, if the permitting takes 2 months, we're probably looking at, end of November as the best scenario for first drilling on the Norwegian projects. So I think that's the timeline. So for, as I say, and one point I will make here is that, clearly on projects like Kjoli, we've got walk-up drill targets. I mean, there's a few things, if you stand on an outcrop that's got 2.2% copper on it, you don't need to over-science it, just go out and drill it. But the flip side is my preference is, and what always works for us is to be a bit more systematic. At Kjoli, we've got a 20-kilometer long belt of all of these, occurrences along it. Let's make sure we've got 6-10 targets ready to go, and then bang, that makes it much quicker to get to the resource status that we're really sort of so eagerly looking for. So the summer really has been this, just making sure we've been systematic, going through all the targets and putting the best foot forward in terms of, the projects to be drilled. But drilling from a Norwegian perspective, we're probably still a couple of months away from drill results, once the permitting finishes. And then on the Canadian side, that's sort of going on in parallel. So, so it could be any time between now and Christmas that we start seeing results on the Canadian side. The Swedish project is too early to drill in terms of discovery drilling. We'll be auger drilling there. And, the Finnish project as well. It's probably a bit early to be doing discovery drilling, but there will be auger drilling and target generation type work as we go forward.
Excellent. I wonder if you could comment on this comment. Obviously, the historic power costs for mining and processing at Løkken and Kjøli was high, where today you're looking at low-cost hydropower available. The whole development proposition has changed, end quote.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, so one of the things, of course, is that all the power in Norway is, most of the power is, the grid power is from the hydroelectric schemes. And in fact, in both Løkken and Kjøli, we have big dams very close to the projects. So the whole infrastructure in terms of just, whether it's highways, railways, electricity, you've got very, very good coverage across, great power grids across the whole country. So to upgrade any of these for a mining operation would really not take a great deal. But of course, as I mentioned, for a first world country, the power costs are probably amongst the lowest in the world. So, it's a great place to be. Power, of course, is one of the key considerations when you're building a mine. But it's nice to know that you have the power lines there, you have the capacity, and the cost is pretty reasonable. So I think we're really well positioned in terms of, once you have a discovery, to then push something on to develop it. I think we're in a really good position there.
Final question: are the assay labs backed up in Finland?
No, in Finland, I couldn't tell you. I haven't. I'm actually going back to Finland next week. So I mean, they have been quite busy. I know the assay labs in Sweden have been quite backed up. Finland as well, I'm sure, has been pretty well backed up. But I'll find out more next week when I'm back on the ground in Finland. But I think what's going to happen is as we get, now we're coming to the end of the summer season, which is when people are sending in most of the samples from field work. I think as you get into the winter here, I'm assuming that backlog should sort of diminish as people turn to drilling more than sort of field samples.
All right. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and please share your feedback on the way out. You can do it right here. and while we close, and of course, you can share this event. Any further ado, pass back to you, Eric, to close this.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell, and thanks to the whole Amvest team for the opportunity, and thanks to all the listeners too. So I hope you enjoyed it, and watch this space as we go forward. To me, I think it's an exciting portfolio, and we've got lots of good things coming up in the short term. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Good day.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.